Ready?
I don't have a PowerPoint though.
Karen, are we live? Okay, great.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Professor Nicholas Wood from the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Texas at Arlington. We are having a few technical issues, but we wanted to get started. Thank you for joining us today for Fall 22's Dialogues in Art. And this is being brought to you by the Department of Art and Art History at UTA, University of Texas, Arlington. This event is scheduled from 11 to 12:30 today and is taking place on a campus Teams link and being live streamed on YouTube. And hopefully you either can see us now or you will shortly see us. The focus of today's Dialogues in Art is based on the exhibition Reminiscing the Now, Directions in Contemporary Clay, which is currently on display at the gallery at UTA, located in the Department of Art and Art History in our Fine Arts building, and is on view from September 6th through October 8th. This exhibit was co-curated by Yana Payusova, which is sitting to my right, and me, the two of us sitting here. Hopefully you can see us on screen. Reminiscing the Now includes 15 artists selected from around the country. Today we have 4 of those artists: Susan Beiner, Peter Christian Johnson, Nick Lenker, and Hannah Pierce. They will each present and talk about their work. Following their presentations, Yana and I will open a discussion with questions and comments for the artist. We encourage that viewers ask questions, make comments for the artists and curators, and become part of the discussion. To get started, Yana will be introducing each of the artists before their individual presentations.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to be running Susan Beiner's presentation. We're having some technical issues, as I mentioned. And welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited to see our artists, and I'm confident that we're going to have a great presentation today. So I'm going to go.
So we're starting, Susan.
Yes, we're going to start with Susan Beiner.
See her screen.
I will also be introducing each of the artists. Let's see.
Oh, yay.
We finally can see the slideshow. Wait, we'll start. All right, so Susan Beiner is our first artist. Okay. She's a ceramic artist and professor at Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts at Arizona State University. Beiner has exhibited nationally and internationally, has received numerous awards and residencies, and her work is included in diverse and prestigious collections such as the Yusheng Ceramics Museum in China, Los Angeles County Museum of Art in California, Zhongji Museum of Contemporary Ceramic Art in Korea, Princess Hof Ceramic Museum in the Netherlands, New Taipei City Yingling Ceramics Museum in Taiwan, and the Long Beach Museum of Art in California, to name a few. Susan, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I'm going to really talk about the ideas that I have for pieces that are mostly my installation work. So there are projects that take about 1 year to 2 years to complete. So we're just going to go through a few of those and I'll tell you what they're about. So the first thing is that I look for ideas in nature, including shapes and patterns, and I use them to kind of reconfigure and design into artwork, creating sort of a contemporary commentary about environmental issues. So next slide. Uh-oh. Yeah, there we go. Okay. This is entitled Bounded Fragility. It's an installation piece based on the idea of like a carpet or a tapestry. This ceramic piece is a warning basically about the fragility of our planet. The surface layers are flora and fauna, and they are the most common motif in rugs from ancient cultures. I've been thinking about using glaze at this point as sort of a unifying element for all the parts. So the glaze chosen needed to be sort of this semi-opaque with a hint of a spark of light. And then as a visual extension of the piece, the corners and the sides, they establish a relationship between the pattern and the multitude of what would be stitches that's comprised of and kind of bound by the history of craft. The next slide, please. Sorry. So this is actually the same piece, and I got it into the Korean International Ceramics Biennale, but I had to make it smaller because I wasn't done with the piece. And so they own it now, but I have lots of extra parts. So this is just what happens with when you're working on a big project over a period of time. Sometimes you have to stop it earlier than expected. Next slide. So to give you an idea of what it's about, this is the central focus of the piece, which is the artichoke. The artichoke represents hope for a prosperous future. It's a food, flower, and medicinal plant, and the artichoke's edible heart is protected by these kind of strong layers. And it's one of the oldest known foods dating back to ancient times in the Mediterranean region. The patterning throughout the piece shows the artichoke in variations of its flowering, so it creates a dense wildflower pattern. The four birds that flank the perimeters of the center are its guardians, protecting what would be the future. The color is a saturated, rich symbol of power, while the gold luster reflects the sun's radiance. The golden thistle is a 3D printed bloom, which reaches kind of an upward trajectory as a representation of our growing technology. Next slide. And so this is just things that I look at, but I was interested in the idea of creating this carpet tapestry for quite a long time. And so this is a rug or a tapestry, which is an event built in Brussels, Belgium. They do this every 2 years, and they use their common flower, which is the begonia, and they actually weave it into this tapestry-like form, and it's 70 by 24 meters, so it's absolutely huge. And so I was doing some research on like content and understanding the symbolic significance of shapes and forms within tapestries. And this is just one I wanted to show you because I think it's incredible. Anyway, next slide. And this is just a close-up of some of the variations of floriforms and the lustered 3D printed form, which is just right in the center. Next slide. This is just a slip casting mold. All of my work is based on mold making and slip casting. I have lots of molds for different projects, and just to give you an example, this is the 3D printed piece representing technology, and so in this case, I would cut it open and cut out those little windows, and that's what made that that piece on the top of the form. So that's that piece. Next slide. So this is called Nature in Cells. It's a wall piece. The content is from a grant that I received from ASU's biodesign area to work with cancer scientists in designing a piece about cancer. It's about the body and how cancer cells replicate and make its way through and overcome the healthy cells. It's created in a circular format to represent a cyclical nature and movement. Next slide, please. So these are just some details. The darker clay body represents the cancerous cells and how they begin invading the other forms. I devised a palette that had the sensibility of what I would think would be internal organs, but referenced some plant materials in nature, since cancer affects humans, animals, and plants. And this piece is permanently installed on ASU campus. Next slide. This is organic dissolution. It is a big room installation, considering it's a whitescape, devoid of color, with just, the exception of a few bits of what it had existed. And it has to do with the negative impact that humans have on the environment, depleting our natural resources. It's continuous, several mound-like shapes in the space, where the growth of these forms start to project upward, climbing up those trellis forms, but it becomes stunted, and then the multitude of these white blooms at the very bottom are made of foam and thread, providing this idea of a density of artificial and dead flora. Next slide. This is a close view of some of the forms and the density of the surface. This piece in itself is a smaller mound, but it's still made up of 8 sections that fit together to create the entire encrusted form as a continuous form. Next slide. And so a while ago, I started to become interested in the idea of the chrysanthemum as a flower and a symbol of vitality. And so I have been to China a few times, and I started this quest for pottery with use of the image of the chrysanthemum. So these are 2 examples, just to kind of give you a sense of things that I look at. Next slide. And so this is where some of the work started. I developed a series of pieces. This one is one of them, called Limelight, and it explores the chrysanthemum and how it's contained within this field of poppies, which are above and below it. It's a 9-section wall-mounted piece. Next slide. This just shows how the piece is made. Again, everything is slip cast, and I build each part from the center out while it's still all very wet, so that when it gets fired, the pieces that hang over into the next piece and don't create a gap. So that's just how I make it. There's a next slide. This is Contained Chrysanthemum, another piece from this series. It's a 21-section piece based on the geometry of flowers, divisible by 4 and a center. It was also, I did some research on architectural tile that I was interested in, so part of this all, comes from that research. Next slide. This is the same structure piece, just with like different surfaces. So once I make body molds, I can then make multiple pieces with different surfaces and try to see how to kind of play with that. So you get a sense for almost a completely different piece. Next slide. This is called non-biodegradable, and it's a piece made up of several mounded sections that fit together on this tabletop surface. And then various pieces of this kind of what I'm quote unquote trash fill in any visible gaps. The dark acrylic layer represents the water, and it's made up of completely recycled glaze from my spray booth at home. I use a lot of glaze. And the next piece, next slide. And this shows you, it's probably hard to see a little bit, but it shows you sort of a continuous form. And on each piece of what I'm calling trash, which is actually porcelain, there is a very small decal label with what that piece of trash is and how long it takes to biodegrade in the ocean or on land. Next slide. And this is probably the biggest installation I've done in 2008 before I got my job. This is called Synthetic Reality. It is a large wall piece that is 205 sections that fit together on 6 running cleats that curve around a corner. It has to do with biotechnology and issues of urban sprawl and the idea of being surrounded by a manufactured and engineered environment. Next slide. This just shows you, this is sort of a detail in a sense. It shows you the pattern of how the piece was built. It was built with interlocking forms that sort of travel up. So as you put the next one on the wall, it locks into the other one, and it's very secure on the wall. Next one, next slide. This is the last slide. And it just shows you the side view of the wall and then a detail of one of the panels that shows these synthetic blooms, which are made of foam and polyfill. I just sewed them and stuffed them, and then they fit on top of the ceramic pieces. And those are both considering that's like the artificial bloom as a result of, of the whole surface. And that's it. Those are just a few pieces. So.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I am going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you for doing that, Yana.
Absolutely, my pleasure. All right, our next artist is Peter Christian Johnson. Peter, if you want to take over the screen, and I will introduce you briefly. He's currently an assistant professor of art at Kent State University after spending 11 years at Eastern Oregon University. He earned his MFA from Penn State and a BS in environmental science at Wheaton College. Peter has been a resident artist and visiting lecturer at the Alberta College of Art and Design, Australian National University, the Archie Bray Foundation, the LH Project, and the Odyssey Center for Ceramic Arts. His work has been exhibited in Canada, Australia, and throughout the United States.
All right. I guess I should put it in the full screen mode, huh? What can you see there?
I would go full
Is that
screen.
better?
Mm-hmm.
There, better? Okay.
You just stopped sharing for a second.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How about that? Can you see that?
We just see you.
Not yet.
No. Let's try this again. Sorry.
And
Is
we
that
have to
there?
say, yes, you're sharing now. And I have to say that our artists are joining us from all over the United States and abroad. So Peter's actually in Denmark right now.
I think we're going to go this way because when I flip to the full screen, it disappears. So we're going to roll like this. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. Considering it's sort of 10 minutes, I thought I would kind of jump into the middle of some things and try to give you a sense of some of the ideas behind my work or some things I flirt with. And yeah, so, some of the themes that I've been working with for a number of years have to do with architecture, this idea of collapse, and this notion of labor or time. And if you see from this image of, a shot of my studio, there's this sense of accumulation that exists in a lot of the work where this building up of tiny little pieces to build these larger sort of architectural forms. And I think that sense of labor is really important to me, although after watching Susan's 200 panel piece, I mean, maybe not as much labor, but I'm really inspired by images like this of this trestle bridge, where it sort of embodies this sense of time and the amount of labor that went into building this form. And I really think about this act of constructing, this act of building as a sort of metaphor about the human condition. And I was really initially inspired with much of this work I've been doing for the last decade. Much of it comes out of this image of Felix Candela's work, who sort of pioneered this idea of shell structure architecture. And you can see from this church is actually in Mexico, but I'm actually drawn to the image of the building under construction even more than the finished piece in the bottom right. And I was just so captivated by this image and thinking about how it um, really had this sort of vitality to it. And it sort of sent me on a quest of thinking about how I could capture some of that power and that sort of potency that I found in this work. And that's when I began to create some of these structures. This was back in 2014. But the idea here is I'm laying a really thick layer of glaze where in shell structure architecture, you have that concrete shell that's built over that framework and that becomes the building. And in my work, I'm laying a thick layer of glaze, then the weight of that often sort of weighs down the porcelain form and begins to warp and distort the structure. And so you can see here in the bottom section of this how the arc has started to bend and it starts to pop. And that's the sort of moment that I'm most excited about capturing here. And you know, much of it's learning to play with form and thinking about how to engineer a particular shape. I grew up working construction with my father, and I think that act of building is something I'm still really fascinated with. And early on in this series, it was really a matter of thinking about how to construct this sort of gridded structure and have this layer of glaze that sort of weighs it down and sort of begins to move the object. And in building these, I think I learned that this moment of collapse, this sort of moment here where these forms start to shift, they start to lose their balance, was sort of a sweet spot that I found had a certain poetry to it. That little moment of collapse or that sorrow that exists in this tilted form, there seems to be a level of humanity within that object. And I think that's something I'm often flirting with, or in many of those pieces, I'm looking for this section where, this moment where these forms start to tilt off their axis, or they have this beginning of this sort of collapse. And that takes a number of different forms. I think this piece is an example of that from 2016, where these are a series of obelisks, or you could think of it the Washington Monument. I wanted to make this sort of jumbled pile of monuments at that time, thinking about what was happening politically. It seemed a sort of a potent picture of how I was feeling. So to have this pile of monuments sort of slumped and collapsed together is really, part of that exploration of what does this moment of collapse start to look like. And there's another body of work that I want to briefly talk about, and that's this sort of cathedral series that was at Fair and Contemporary in 2016, where I'm sort of reinvestigating these Gothic cathedrals, these buildings that took 200 years to make in many ways. And it started off with really thinking of these blueprints that I found, in doing research and thinking about the structure that existed within the blueprints. And so much of my work, or especially back then, less so lately with 3D modeling software, but comes from drawing on the computer. And so with this body of work, I extrapolated from those blueprints and sort of created an abstract version of many of these cathedrals. So you can see, I don't know if this is the Notre Dame here. So I created a sort of abstract version. I think I picked 5 or 6 different cathedrals for this body of work, and then I would set of changing, their axis. So by propping them up, I would force a distortion to happen. So you can see this cathedral is propped on both ends. It starts to sag throughout the center, or in this case, this is laid on its side, it's sort of capsized. And I think, the goal is that there's enough labor involved or in the piece. They often have 2,000 to 3,000 little porcelain bits, and I want there to be a tension there when the building begins to collapse. It needs to have that sense of sorrow where the labor involved and it's starting to sort of break down. This one's fired upside down, so the glaze is starting to run through the cathedral itself, and then you can see the bending of that structure, sort of capturing that moment. Or in this one, which is also laying on its side. If I fire them on the way that in the orientation that they're built, they do stand up. This is an example of what it would look like if it was fired in its normal orientation. And these are fairly large. They're 30 or so inches, as you can see from these installation shots. And that sense of scale. This exhibition was shown with these sort of blueprints that I made as sort of wall drawings to sort of, I think what another interesting factor is that sort of real precision that exists within a digital rendering that has all the math and all that preciseness. And then what happens when you make this object by hand, it has a natural level of distortion. And that's a moment that I find really compelling. It goes back to some of these images. Before I moved here to Ohio, I teach at Kent State right now. I was teaching in Oregon, and some of these barns are things that I would drive by on a regular basis. These sort of 100-year-old barns that have, started to collapse. The spine breaks, and it starts to bend. And I remember thinking how beautiful I found these buildings to be. That they seem to really capture, for me, a level of humanity in that. I think that sort of a brokenness that exists within these buildings, it seemed a lot more proper or related to the human condition than the new buildings. And that's something that still drives me, I think, is that collapse, and why I think that sort of collapse is so intriguing. At the same time, this is back in maybe 17 or 16. This was an image that was on the news often in the background. The Capitol dome was under construction, and it had this level of scaffolding around it. And I thought, that was such a poignant metaphor for our democracy being, under construction, and thinking about all of these, the sense of scaffolding to hold something up, to for something to be in the act of change, I guess. But more so, it's also just beautiful. If I look at these scaffolded structures, I think, those linear elements is something that I've been chasing, and I still continue to be fascinated with. They have that sort of repeated unit, and that sense of construction sort of as a through line through work that came long before this. But scaffolding, is another sort of metaphor, another sort of image that I play with in my work. And so this body of work that was in New York in 2018, I'm thinking about in the way that these objects are displayed. So this sort of scaffolded armature that allows me to pair.
Let's try.
Could I hit content only or side by side?
Let's do content only. And if it doesn't work, I will show your screen.
Did it do anything or?
Not yet. Oh, I think it's going. Hopefully. It looks like it. Oh, we're seeing it now.
You see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it doesn't work if it's in full screen mode or something.
Okay. The images look great.
So I have some notes here to keep myself on track. So you might see me flipping around notes. I get sidetracked easily. So my work consists of autobiographical narratives and social commentary that are presented in very surreal and metaphorical ways. I have my own personal visual metaphors that I use to kind of protect the work in a way, to keep things somewhat discreet, open-ended, and applicable to other viewers' experience. For example, I'll use, just one of the metaphors is I'll use rubber ducks without eyes to refer to childhood innocence and not seeing things for what they are. And I felt like a lot of trauma in my life has always bonded me with ceramics. A lot of the traumas are to express that anger. My work kind of falls under the category of pop surrealism. There's a lot of like bright colors, childlike references, and tongue-in-cheek humor. I made this series of man-child pieces as a result of anguish over loving an alcoholic and kind of feeling surrounded by addiction and destructive behaviors. But I feel like everyone has these childlike coping mechanisms where they rely on a substance or behavior in excess, but some are more destructive than others. I feel like we feel so restrained all the time, and I think we all do something in excess that no one knows about. So I hint at things in my work like abundance of cigarettes, coffee, bubbles, candy. I've never been into showing a sense of morality in my work or teaching the viewer a lesson or trying to prove a point. It's just really about observing people and kind of prevalent in my own work. And you could really like see me in all the work as well. Even when I'm depicting a man or someone else entirely, everyone asks me if it's me. And I've always been very interested in expressing the figure ever since I was a kid. I grew up kind of like a theater kid and always into art, but I think the kind of theater and drama is also very prevalent in the work as well. And I've always used ceramic sculptures as a canvas, where I've brought my inspiration from printmaking and illustration. There's fairly 2D elements in the work, but as you walk around them, you kind of see what's 3D and what's 2D. And I use a lot of kind of warping perspectives, and I like to disorient the viewer a bit while they're looking at the work. But you could see the printmaking influence in the line work that I use. I was very into for a while, cross-hatching details with the brush. Stippling piece. With their tongues sticking out, and I made some pieces with masks on, but I think I wanted to like confront people more and just have like tongues out and kind of have it looking infected psychedelic tongues. So there's a lot of heads, but I started making these giant 2 feet to 3 feet size heads. And up close, they're just thousands of dots that I painted on, and I just kind of obsessively love doing this so much. But yeah, I just love big projects and just working on a big project for a long time. Here's some details. So I actually installed these with neon. My partner, Michael Hernandez, he does glass and neon, so I've asked him to make me some things. But I love how the neon more kind of wild and theatrical. This is one that I showed at in Sika recently. Juice. This one's about 3 feet. I put like fabric in the mouth. I've always had these little elements of like other materials that I'm using that I think just fit the work more than ceramics will work for it. So I just use it when I find it appropriate. This is a piece that I showed at Bernardo Foundation in France. They asked me to do an installation. So the concept of this piece was kind of like in collaboration with Anne Richard, the founder of Hey Hey Team. And that's a magazine in Paris that does like I don't know, they show the coolest work. So I'm just like thrilled that she invited me to the show. She was the curator of the show and wanted an install. So I kind of made all these like components. Jessica Harrison was there, and I've always loved her work, so that was really cool to meet her. And Mara Superior. Yeah. So I've been just kind of thinking about all these things that I saw in my travels in Europe. And, you know, I saw like Gaudi architecture and just like all these things that I've wanted to see like my whole life. So I've been making all this work that's like, I don't know, just influenced by and like, I guess hard to talk about already because it just happened, but thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. That was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, your camera is off. I don't know if you have any control over it. It might be Teams again.
Really? It says it's on. Let me try.
Okay. All right, there you are.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. That was fantastic. We have about 25 minutes for questions. And so Nick and I each have about 10 questions. I don't think we're going to get through all of them. But maybe we'll take turns and then
Sure.
Do you want to start? I'll stop.
I can. So in keeping with the title of this exhibition and with an understanding that no exhibit could completely highlight the vast diversity of contemporary clay artworks or any other media for that fact, what are your thoughts or perceptions on the current directions in clay?
We'll start with an easy one, why don't you?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Can I mean, does it have to be about our work? We can just kind of say what we think, right?
Anyway, yeah.
Well, I can start, just say what I think about it. And I think based on what's going on in the world today, I would say that there's a lot of work, and Hannah's included in this, I guess. And in a way, all of us are, but identity definitely plays a role in current aspects of work, I think. People are, especially after COVID, people are rethinking even who they are and how they fit into the world. More diverse populations are, coming forward. And so there's new artists with new ideas about their own work and how that should be, in the field, projected into the field. And I also think, and of course, myself, I'm sort of concerned with the planet. And so I do think that, of course, there are lots of environmental concerns, and those are coming out. That's also coming out in artwork, but it's kind of switched over to or like connected to politics in a way, because I think it's been like usurped from the political stance of the entire country. So I think that's sort of a big issue. So, I mean, I would say I would start there anyway. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else?
I mean, the question is, what's the state of contemporary clay?
What your
Current
thoughts
trend.
are or perceptions,
Mhm.
currently.
Yeah, I don't know if it'd be in the last few years, but I think in the last 5 years or the last decade, I think what's been so amazing has to do with the sort of the borders, the boundaries sort of continuing to move, right? So ceramics is increasingly interfacing with the design world. It's also obviously interfacing with the contemporary art world in a way that it never has before. And so, in that giant Venn diagram, ceramics is sort of accepted and boundless in a way that it certainly wasn't 20 years ago, in my estimation. And that gives a lot of opportunity for artists to imagine what scope they want to participate in, how they want to engage with the broader context. There's a lot less of a silo. And of course, this is not new, but this is new in the last decade, and I think it's changed a lot. And I think that, obviously, I think social media has continues to play a large role with the democratization of taste that was not necessarily the same. I think it changes the way that we look at art and the way that we understand what's happening. So I think both of those things, I would say, play into how I see ceramics in the last decade.
I think right now ceramics is kind of the hot material to use for most artists. I know so many artists that are just, they're not ceramic artists, but they're using the material. Right now I'm working with, Matthew Barney, the artist from New York. Right. So he's doing a big project here in Phoenix, and we're working with his team to kind of figure out the, facility, everything, how to make it, because, he's an artist, but he doesn't necessarily know, or his team, how to use the ceramic material. And so, there's this conflict, I think, that happens between ceramic people who know the ceramic material, and then, it kind of goes off what Peter was saying in a way. And then the other artists, including other artists that don't necessarily know the material but want to use the material, and so they need ceramic artists to be able to do that. It's sort of interesting what's just happening. It is sort of an explosion, though.
And the multiple ceramic installations in the Venice Biennial too, the Biennale, there were huge ceramic installations. So I feel like it is kind of the hot material.
Yeah.
Not a hot new material, a hot old
Right.
material.
Right.
I think it's still a matter of how ceramic institutions capitalize on that, though, or participate. I think, there needs to, we continued thinking about how NCECA and institutions like university institutions, right, how they engage with the contemporary context. So, because they're not in the Whitney Biennial. I mean, they're not in the Venice.
Right.
So why is that?
Anyone else?
What's your next question?
Next question.
Should we move on to the next question, or Nick and Hannah, did you want to answer this as well?
I would just say, sort of going off what Peter was saying about social media, is that it does feel like, there is democratization of like sort of like you can stand out, but you sort of have to make a show of, embodying your lifestyle and, put on the show of the artist and sort of be performative in it to sort of get views. And that has to do a lot with like identity that like Susan was talking about. People who rise to the top are like engaging with the, they are, touching, getting the engagement. And to do that, you have to show faces. You have to, there's a lot of stuff involved in that. And I think it's sort of changing the way, people's practices might, be run.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's all I really have to say about that.
Great.
That's good. Hannah?
Yeah, I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think that I think it's true, like social media and just more, everyone's artwork out there. I think it's kind of contributed to just, people that aren't exactly like to, because they've just.
I can't hear her. Is anyone else?
I think she's frozen.
She's frozen here.
Hannah? She might have to jump off and get back in. Hannah, can you hear us? Oh, no. All right, move on to the next question. Please describe a typical day, being as specific as possible. I'm talking about like your studio practice. Are you an early bird? Are you a late night owl? What time do you come to the studio? What do you listen to when you work? I think I'm always curious to learn about people's practices.
Well, I could start again. My typical day, besides schoolwork, I would say is I'm very much an early bird. I usually go to the gym or I hike in the morning. Hiking is one of my favorite things to do. And then, come back and I'm in the studio for the day. It depends on what project I'm working on or if I'm doing some writing or research. But if I'm just working, I listen to TED Talks sometimes or podcasts or, anything like that, books on books sometimes. And, I'm just working here. It's pretty hot out. It's actually getting cooler now, but when you have to do work outside, it really has to be done early. So it kind of forces you because over 100 degrees is kind of hot for working. So I think that kind of pushes you to work outside, or to get up early and work outside. But, it just depends on what I'm doing. I slip cast, I make molds, and attach parts and, I have very scheduled times. I'm a very scheduled person. So I would say depending on what part of a project I'm working on, I might be casting one day, I might be mold making one day. It's very kind of specific because my building is limited to the wetness or dryness of the slip cast parts. So that's kind of like a day, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you work every day or like?
Well, I teach at school, university, so it's definitely not every day except for in the summer. It's whenever I'm not teaching, I'm usually in the studio, sometimes in the evening, but I'm not a big late night person. So school takes up a lot of time, to be totally honest. And it's very difficult sometimes to work on larger projects during the school year. So, I just work anytime. I think everyone would agree, you just work anytime that you're not teaching at school. As it's just hard, but you just have to do what you have to do. So I don't know. There's no real answer for it. You just kind of learn how to balance those two things and schedule your time so that you can get what you need to be finished. But like my projects take a long time, and I think part of that is if I weren't teaching and I was just a full-time studio artist, obviously I'd probably get them completed at a shorter period. But that just doesn't happen because I'm teaching. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. Hannah, you had to hop off. I think you froze. So we've moved on to the next question, so maybe you can answer both. But I was asking you to describe a typical work day, whether you work every day in the studio or not. And then are you an early bird or a late night? Just kind of what does your work day look like? Do you listen to stuff when you work?
I'm definitely a late night, and I'll always I teach too, but I'll always try to get started early and it never works. And I'll just put off I don't know, my studio. I always laugh so much at people's time-lapse videos because mine would look so ridiculous. They'd be like, what is she even doing? She's not working and she's just staring at the wall. But yeah, a lot of
Maybe with the video off, sometimes it'll be faster for audio.
Yeah.
But I'll jump in. I have two kids. I think a schedule works. Sorry, Hannah, you're back. You want to finish?
Oh no, I don't know why it's doing that. It seemed fine, but I can't tell on mine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
go
don't want to
ahead,
cut you
David.
off. I drop my kids off for school and then get to the studio early, around 8, and I teach like Susan. So I'm working on either sides of classes or the numerous faculty meetings that we have. So, and of course, in the summer, I work the same hours. So I work from 5 days a week, from 8 in the morning in the summer as well. And I don't work on the weekends because I'm married and have kids, and I would like to stay married. And we have a farm that we run, so I keep to pretty strict hours. I like to be there in the morning because the students don't get there in the morning. So I have numerous hours in the studio before anyone gets there, and then I usually try to leave around 6. So that's 5 days a week, and whether it's the summer or spring break or Christmas break, and that's how I work. And I would listen to audiobooks if I don't have to think, like if I'm doing a repetitive thing and then if I have to think, make a decision, I just put my headphones on so everyone knows not to talk to me, but there's nothing playing.
Crafty.
Secret revealed.
But see, I think this is so great because for some reason we still have this idea of the artist from the Impressionist time, like this person who stays up all night drinking and kind of is this free spirit. But every working artist that I know is actually working and pretty disciplined. So it's I don't know why it's such a difficult thing to shake, this idea of this artist as the solitary genius doing whatever once a month. So Nick, do you want to talk about?
No geniuses anymore. So, but if we're up against the show, then I will put the kids to bed and I'll work late, but only if it's up against a deadline.
Yeah, I can talk. I'm sort of in between studios at the moment. But when I did have my studio, it was pretty regular. Especially if I have deadlines, I'm in there a lot, preparing slabs for the next day, so they'd be set up. And I don't know, I do work kind of like a writer when I'm like developing new projects, so I keep like an outline of like my ideas for this next stuff that I'm working on, and will add to it whenever I can. And if I'm making like animation stuff, I can do that, at home. Like I don't need to be in like clay studio. So, it really varies, but because I work for the gallery part-time, like, I have 4 days that I can use for studio work. So it varies.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So I think we have time for one more question each, and then I think we have to wrap up.
Right. So,
unfortunately.
So this is kind of a two-part question. How would you describe the level of influence the history of ceramic art has had on your ideas and approaches to working with clay? And do you think that today's modern or contemporary art history plays a larger or lesser influence for you?
Those are good questions.
Yeah.
I think that the things that I'm most inspired by are probably not art. So if I think about what is influencing my studio practice in the most effective ways, is probably things that sit outside of art history. However, I do feel like I'm responsible to know what already exists within the field, and both as an educator and as an artist, I have a responsibility to be aware of what's going on and what has preceded, knowing that what I'm doing now is always built on that foundation, right? I wouldn't be able to make the things I'm making now without all of the other people that made moves before me. So I think there's two different things. I think I'm aware of what's come before, or try to be, and I try to be appreciative of how the doors open to me because of that. But I don't really look at other artists for inspiration. I'm inspired by other artists, and as far as their career goes, and their work ethic, and how amazing they are. But I think I would say that, yeah, my influences probably come from other things I look at and read.
I sort of, I'm kind of similar to that. I think I'm probably a little older, so I sort of grew up in ceramics with learning about the history of ceramics and understanding it. And I mean, I was a teapot maker when I first started. So, and that was a long time ago. And I think it took a long time to be able to say, or to be able to think about what sculpture was, and to be able to put yourself in that place. And so I kind of feel like I started with a heavy influence from the history of ceramics, and then moved to the elements that I thought were important. And influences now are really about my surroundings and the environment. Those are the things I'm interested in, and the kind of world that we live in. Peter mentioned he does some farming or something, and I'm just highly interested in that. I do some things on my own property. I think all of that is kind of rolled together for me to figure out the kind of work that I want to make. And recently, not fairly recently, I would say, I've become most interested in science and working with scientists, as you saw that one project. And now universities are starting, I'm just going to insert this, universities are starting to, medical schools are starting to have humanities classes, so that there's sort of connection between, this humanness part that we all have. And so I'm teaching a course at Creighton University about clay. It's a clay course, but also this just idea of like taking scientific facts and ideas and like translating them into ceramics or into art in general, for a way to have it better, the layman to have a different kind of understanding. And so I think that is also folded into kind of community and environment in a way. And I think contemporary art, again, like Peter said, I think it's my duty to have an awareness of what's going on in the world in terms of contemporary art. And it's very interesting to me. And I feel like it's important to me to have a handle on it, but I'm not sure that it influences directly the kind of work that I'm making. It influences how I teach, because I'm interested in connecting certain ideas for students and using materials that are not just clay, and having more interdisciplinary ideas come into focus when I'm teaching. So, maybe on the back burner, it kind of influences how I think about my own work, but it's not directly. So.
Nick or Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, same. Like I keep an eye on what's going on with, ceramics in general, and artists I follow. And I mean, but my inspiration is very much coming from the stuff I'm looking at, and a lot of that is, online. And I do, I think I would be more influenced by like game designers, that like that kind of history that has been sort of like probably more influential to me as a growing artist. Yeah, for sure, I'm like aware of what's going on with ceramics and the history of it. And you don't want to be repeating someone else's statement, or be too yeah closed off. I mean, I think the cross pollination between like other mediums and like ideas coming into ceramics is what, you know, makes for interesting art, generally. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. Hannah, are you? Hannah is
I think
very
she's
still
frozen.
right now. She's frozen.
Hannah, if you can hear us, can you possibly turn off your video? I think it might help with your audio and connection.
She can't hear us.
Okay, so we'll move on.
It's already.
All right, so the last question that I have is, I'm going to cheat and just take 2 questions and pretend like it's 1 question, because I really want to ask them both. So I come from a painting background. I was trained very traditionally in Russia, and I started working in ceramics about 10 years ago. And as a painter, while in graduate school, I sat on many graduate seminars with ceramic students. And I feel like this idea of failure is really present in ceramics, this idea of working on something really hard, and then there's a surprise. It's not always a good surprise. But this idea of, you know, for a painter, it's usually a lot more stable. You work on a painting, it's still there in the morning. It doesn't crack. It doesn't melt. Like, it's very stable. And so I feel like in my practice, I've really had to embrace this idea of failure and not being so tied to, you know, the final outcome. So how do you deal with failure and also artist block, if you've ever experienced it? So that's my first question. And the second question is, what advice do you have for young artists who are just starting out? I feel like they're sort of related. The questions are sort of related.
Nick, you want to go? We left you to the end last time.
Yeah, go for it.
Failure. Let's see. You know, I have pieces like crack all the time. Like, you know, I don't really care that much because, you know, the way my process is, like, I am covering up seams and like between decals and stuff, and so like I can use that and make it part of the work. It's probably a cop out, but you know, I also, you know, I am okay with not being a master of the material, and I'm letting it, you know, do what it needs to do in the kiln. I'll try to like prevent like disastrous occurrences, but you know, and it's also limitations with the colors, with decals and stuff. So it's like, you know, there's a lot of frustrations with clay, and like it is, I don't, sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? But it can be very rewarding. It's a challenge, and I don't know. I don't know how I mean, I just accept that, you know, it's not always going to be a perfect thing. But it's something to try for, and I think the challenge, you know, is good. And then the thing that comes out is sometimes more impressive because it's so challenging. But my suggestions for young artists, I don't know. Be independently wealthy. I would say, you know, find. Well, I should say, like, one of my mentors told me this, and it's just don't give up. I mean, you do it long enough, a lot of people are going to drop out of the, you know, and, you know, then you'll become, you know, more of a master of your craft, and you will rise to the top, and, you know, some things will happen. I mean, if you don't give up, then you're bound to be more successful if you do give up. That being said, I mean, it's a very difficult life, especially if you're not, I mean, I'm like, I don't work at a university, so like I, you know, because I'm like in between studios, like I'm not making any ceramics. Having the security of sort of like a job is great. But yeah, it's an expensive thing to do, and ceramics requires a lot of facilities, so like, you know, it's tough. I don't know what my advice would be other than like I hope you really love it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's good.
Because
Nice.
it's difficult. It's difficult. It does have its rewards, but sometimes they are far between. Artist block. Let's see. I'm in the midst of it currently, so I mean, I'm working through it. It's more like the, what is the purpose of what I'm doing at this moment? Like, I had much more purpose in, one of my last shows, and it's difficult to like have the drive and motivation when there's not that purpose behind it. And I do love making beautiful objects and sculptures, and thinking about like the composition and everything of that sculpture, and that's challenging and that can be rewarding. But usually I'm more interested in the conceptual linking of the objects I'm making. So if that's not there, it can be a little bit difficult to have motivation. So I'm working on that right now. But don't give up. Right?
That's right. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
I think artist block is hard. I mean, I'm here in Denmark. I have a month because I need to not have any. I'm making a lot of bad work. I'm like just exploring things, and the pressure to like continue to make new, different things is hard. I mean, I think maybe some artists are more content with iteration than others, and I think that's great too. But I think, that's where sometimes deadlines can be useful. But I don't know, the artist block, I'm here feeling pressure to like have this genius idea while I'm on this residency, and it's not like you can snap your fingers and be inspired. So you just start fumbling around, and I think some interesting things will hopefully come from it. At least they have in the past. I hope it continues to happen. I'm supposed to answer a question about, what was the first one?
How do you deal with failure? Failure or
Oh.
things not working out in the studio?
Yeah. I don't know if you can make good art if it's precious. My perspective, like you have to lose the preciousness of it in order to take the risk necessary to have exciting things happen. And so when that preciousness starts to dissipate, then you can start to take bigger risks, because the failure is just part of the process. And some of the most exciting leaps I've had in my studio have been failures that have been, exciting moments where something happened unexpectedly. It doesn't mean that piece was a winner, but it led to something else. And so I think failure, in many ways, when our hands become when my hands get better and better and I can do something more and more effectively, the work actually gets more boring. So, there's something about keep pushing yourself to be in that uncomfortable zone, because we get more and more competent with this material every year that we do it, but it doesn't make the work necessarily better. And so I don't know, the failure part seems to be, good, but then you're talking to the person that is really the failure. That's what my work is often interested in, is that moment of collapse, right? I think that's where the poetry starts to happen. But I don't think you can take risks if your work is too precious. So there's a third thing advice to students. Yeah, Nick.
It's really 3 questions, not even 2. Yes, what advice?
You got to want it. I like what Nick, I mean, if you need to want it, I mean, it's tough being a teacher these days, because I'm not sure that our students always want it, but you need to be willing to, it's a lifestyle, it's a commitment to, to make. You kind of have to work harder than the people around you. And I tell myself, I think it's a perseverance game. I think it's there's a many artists that I respect that they worked 50 years before they consistently and then started to get that sort of recognition. I have a ton of respect for those tenacious, sort of persistent people that just you make it because you're passionate about it, you're excited about it. Some days, at some moments, but it's a sort of commitment game. That's not advice. I don't. That's probably that's the opposite of advice. But I don't know. Try to stay excited. If you burn out, if you extinguish your excitement for it, you're dead in the water. You have to find a way to stay excited. It's too hard of a career if you lose that flame. So I think you've got to cultivate that. You have to protect that. And you need community. That's my other advice. You need some level of community, some kind of support, whether that's virtual or in person. You need community, I think, to survive in the game, at least in this culture.
Great, thank you.
Penny, you want to go since you're alive and on?
Is it working?
Yes.
Yeah, you're
Really?
moving.
Failure. God, I wasn't even expecting to talk. But
You could always pretend to freeze. Oh, I think she did freeze.
Or freeze.
Oh my God,
No.
that happened fast. Bummer. Think she'll unfreeze? I mean, should I go or to just?
I think just go, Susan. Yeah.
So I started as a painter too, which is Oh, there she's back. Do you want to start again, Hannah?
Hannah, do you want to turn off your video? Because that might help.
everybody else's looks fine.
But we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I don't know. I think that when you come across really big failures, I think it's fine to like take breaks, but to always get back in the studio and feel fine with like just be angry at stuff. I think it's fine to like be angry. Like life's not fair sometimes. Like you don't always get to do what you want to do with your work. And like when you want to do it. But yeah, I think like perseverance is like so huge. And like not seeing it as like, when you come across a big failure, just see it as like, this is very temporary and I'm gonna, be doing this for years. So this doesn't really matter. This moment that is terrible.
And then we had, artist block. If you've ever experienced it, how did you overcome it? And then any advice that you have for young artists just starting out?
A lot. And what I was gonna say earlier was that I'm like 100% like inspired by like other contemporary artists, and like I look at historical work and stuff like that, but I love the dialogue that happens among artists that are paying attention to one another, and kind of these like motifs or like things that people will use, like something will be like popular for a few years, and I think it's like so interesting that that we can kind of create these like styles together, and that's kind of how like art movements happen. And like it's never like one artist creating something. Like you could tell yourself you're so unique and you're creating this one thing, but I think everyone's like so inspired by what's going on around them. So my advice is to pay attention to other artists around you. I don't do well in a studio space where it's just me. I don't do well with that. I like to have like big windows where I could look at stuff, and I like to see other people working around me and get ideas from them.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
So I was just saying, like I started as a painter, like you, Yana, and I think my use of color and interest in glaze chemistry is from that. The way I use glaze is more like painting than traditional glazing, I think. Anyway, I can't remember what the first part is. The failure, was that the first?
Yes.
So I mean, I agree with what everybody says. I think you have to fail. I have lots of failure. For me, sometimes, yeah, I don't know. I have lots of failure to get to what I'm trying to get to before I actually even start like a big project. I kind of have to have a plan, and so I have to know that it's going to work. I have to know how it's going to hang on the wall, or what the back has to be like in order to make the front, that kind of stuff. So, and like everyone has said, the failure spurs something, like sometimes something so amazing that you just kind of go with that, and that becomes your piece. So, nothing wrong with failure. And sometimes I have failure when I'm in the midst of the project, and that's what glue is for. Because I use like 7 different kinds of glue for different reasons. And I use concrete, and so, nothing wrong with it. It's mixed media, so I think that's nothing wrong with failure. It's a great thing. Artist block, I would say, is a time to sort of sketch and play and just kind of question what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And for me, sometimes also I'm writing grants for projects, and so that kind of helps define maybe where I am and during that time period. Advice would be just like what everybody else says. I think you just have to consistently question yourself and your motives, your passion and your determination. You have to be persistent. I think students today don't really understand how difficult this field is to really get somewhere. Every step of the way, I think, Nick was talking about facility. I mean, and Hannah too, like you have to have facility first. So that's your community, because who can afford it? I mean, it's so expensive, so yeah, it's just a total commitment. But it's wonderful once you get there. Once you've committed, it's wonderful. And I also think that the field of ceramics, and I'm sort of talking about inclusively, not necessarily every artist that's using the material, but the community of ceramics is quite forgiving and quite fun to be a part of. And it's small enough that you can meet people like at NSEEK or something. It's just fun to meet friends and talk about ideas. And I think students or new people in the field become part of that, and they really enjoy it. And I think it helps them think about, what they want to do and why they want to do it, so anyway.
Great, thank you. I think that's probably a good place.
It's a wrap.
All the advice here to wrap this up, and we thank you so much for sharing with us. The show looks great. We wish you could see it in person. A brochure is being created, so there'll be with a lot of images, so you'll receive those, get a sense of it.
The show looks really stunning, really beautiful. We will have some high resolution images. We'll distribute those, but everyone that's coming in is having this amazing reaction to it. So it's been such a delight speaking with you today. I wish we had time for more questions. And thank you for putting up with all the technical difficulties.
Yeah.
I think we've pushed through, we persevered. And I hope to see you in person at some point and meet you.
This is our first meeting.
Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks very much. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. Good to meet you all virtually.
Yeah, good to meet you, everyone.
Say hi to Hero for us, because he's there with you, right? You're at the Guligor together.
Yeah, Hero is here. Yes, I'll say hi.
See, it is a small world.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.